Today I have decided to share my views on contemporary Hindu woman, strangled soul, or an emancipated one. So, before I talk about exactly what my paper is all about, I just wanted to give a brief touch up about the kind of work which I've been doing. I'm basically a philosopher. My MPhil as well as my PhD has been in existentialism and feminist and Asian philosophy. It was basically when I was doing my PhD, at that point of time, I started stumbling upon the larger concept of Vedic philosophy, which I believe most of you must be aware about. And largely in my PhD, when I was trying to look about and think through on the concept of gender gap, was actually at that point of time that I started reading certain kinds of Sanskrit texts, so certain kind of Hindu Sanskrit text. And by the virtue of being born in a particular family, Sanskrit was the language which was readily available to me. And right now, it's been close to 1.5 years that, with the help of my Guruji, who is my sir, he's in Varanasi, Benaras right now, whose name is Krishna Murari Tripathi. Under his supervision, I am reading Rig-Veda right now. So the talk which I would be giving to you, or the discussion which we'll be having with you today, there would be certain excerpts which I would be using from the Rig-Veda to form a hypothesis and trying to talk to you about what are the ideas that are going through or that are there in my mind right now. So to begin with, why this title, Contemporary Hindu Woman, Strangled Soul or an Emancipated One? It's more of like a personal standpoint theory, I believe, which I'm doing when I'm talking about something like this, because I realized once when I submitted my PhD, there were a lot of tick boxes in a contemporary Indian society for independent women. It starts with marriage, sometimes it touches upon pregnancy, reproduction, menstruation. And while the entire society was busy in lecturing me about how my biological clock was ticking or how I should adhere to be a good daughter and get married and all that kind of things, surprisingly, I started thinking that, okay, if as a philosopher I'm stumbling upon these kinds of empirical problems where the society is telling you that unless and until you do not do things like this, you would not be considered as a good daughter, as a good XYZ, then what exactly are my texts telling me? Is it something, and surprisingly, every time when I've spoken to anyone from my community or from my society, the first impression which they give you is this is how it is written in the text. So this is exactly what Vedas and Upanishads and the Ramayans and the Mahabharatas are telling. So if you want to be accepted, this is the answer. So I thought that because now everyone it's the age-old fashion to quote and misquote and re-quote from texts. I decided to read it by myself, and not to my surprise, when I started reading it, things were a little different. Things weren't the way as conservative and as close-ended as most of the people in the community think it is. So I thought that when I came to know about a conference like this, I thought this would be a perfect place to talk about an idea like this, where you talk about theoretically what has been written in the scriptures and empirically what is been happening. And we all know that how religions are also, in a way, they are part and parcel of patriarchy as well, because there's a lot of oral traditions which has been involved with most of the religious practices, with most of the cultural practices. And when I started stumbling upon it, it was very interesting for me to see this curve which was happening in terms of human behavior, in terms of how society is reacting. So I thought that and this particular paper which I have carved out, it's also part of my postdoc proposal on which I'm working right now, which is trying to look for the lost voices from the Vedic philosophy or from the Vedic tradition. So this is largely, the sections and the excerpts are largely from the Rig-Veda. And just to quickly begin with, every time when we talk about Vedic philosophy, I feel it has long been debated, it has been critiqued, it has been dismissed, debated and critiqued, also because these are one of the core scriptural Hindu values, dismissed as, I feel, popularly. There is also a Eurocentric discourse which has largely also painted it as a monolithic category of understanding. something which has only to do with spiritualism and abstraction. So when I was framing my proposal, when I was trying to work on a postdoc idea, this paper, which is also part and parcel of it, I was also writing from that particular perspective as well, that would it be fair to paint a particular school of thought from one particular understanding. So whether it's the Rig-Veda, whether we talk about the Upanishads, the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, I feel all these can be considered as a valid carrier of epistemology. Epistemology stands for a particular source of knowledge, and it stands for epistemology not because it gives you a glimpse of who we used to be, but or where we are coming from, but also because it gives you, if you do a symptomatic reading about it, it gives you an idea of who can be a knower, who knows, who has been the subject of understanding, who has been the object. So it was basically through this duality that I started reading Rig-Veda, and certain kinds of instances, certain kind of dialogues and debates which has happened, which has been written in that particular section, was something I thought could be very interesting to discuss in a forum like this, where largely we still see taboo in a society, in an Indian society, whether we talk about life choices which an Indian woman makes, or whether we talk about reproduction, whether we talk about menstruation, whether we talk about having an eccentric lifestyle. So what exactly does the most ancient Vedic text is offering to us in terms of this duality which exists in our society? So interestingly, in the Rig Veda, when it begins, it talks about 6 stages of knowledge attainment. So when it's talking to you, when it's trying to make sense to you that how do we understand a concept, whether that concept is related to knowing about a copy, knowing about whether it's hot, knowing about how someone is doing, it says that there are basically 6 stages through which we know about anything. The first is called as Jayate, which gets translated into the first cause. The second is called as Asti, which gets translated into being born. The third is translated as Viparimate, which stands for change, any idea, the way it changes. Fourth is called as Vardhate, which means growing up. Fifth is called as Apakshiyate, which means getting old. And sixth is called as Vinayshati, which means getting destroyed. So it's basically through, this is the gateway through which Rigveda is presenting to you that what are the ways through which we know about something, whether it's about knowing how to live a good life, whether it's about knowing how to live an authentic life. So I thought that these 6 stages of knowledge attainment, which the Rig-Veda mentions, could be used as a very good category of understanding. And while it's important to understand these, it's essential to understand the sources, which stands for Praman in Hindi, in Sanskrit, in the Vedic philosophy too. When we are talking about memory, when we are talking about primordial sources, when we are talking about the testimony of scholars and learned individuals, all these are part and parcel in which or how which we try to understand Vedic philosophy. Now, the first question which I was encountered, which I was also thinking about, that how does the question of woman is getting addressed in the Rig Veda or in the Vedic philosophy in general. So, and very intentionally, I have chosen not to talk about the cult tradition because I believe a lot has already been written and said about it. So specifically in the Rig Veda, if we talk about, there has been a distinction which has been made between 2 categories of women. The first is called as Brahmavadini, which means these are the scholarly women who chose not to get married, who have dedicated their life to knowledge and wisdom. And the second category is called as Rajaswala, which means these are those group of women who have chosen to be in the realm of domesticity. The term Rajaswala, it basically stands for women who are capable of reproducing. They have family. So largely, if you read the Vedic philosophy or if you read Rig Veda, every time when they are talking about women who are married, who are mothers, who are daughters, the term Rajaswala has been used, and that is the larger term which is usually used in Vedic philosophy as well when you talk about a woman who is going through menstruation, who is reproducing. So I thought that when I came across a category like this, that okay, this particular text is not only acknowledging or recognizing, but categorically stating that there is a place for everyone in a society and people can choose for themselves. Women can choose for themselves. So the one is the Brahmavadini, the second is the Rajaswala. And then I also started getting more interested about how exactly this category has been developed in the Rig-Veda. And I realized one thing, that we all have heard about Gargi, Kapila, Maitreyi, uh, Huram Khatun, Lopamudra, Sita, Draupadi, Shubnakha, Mirabai. But there was this concept which has been used in the Rig Veda. It's called as Rishi Patni. So if I translate this term, Rishi stands for scholars and Patni stands for better halves or wives or partners. So a lot many times in the Rig Veda, you find lots of dialogues and debates which has happened between of Rishi Patnis with each other, Rishi Patnis or the woman dictating their husband, critiquing their husband, participating in debates, participating in dialogues. But unfortunately, every time when we have spoken about a Hindu woman or a Vedic woman, we have always used certain kinds of old philosophical voices, whether it's Gargi or Kapila or Sita or Draupadi. And those were the kinds of names which were getting revolved throughout. So Rigveda becomes also a very interesting carrier of epistemology, because it opens this big avenue which is called as Rishi Patni, or the women who were interested in scholarly activities, whether through choice, whether whether it was related to circumstances, or even after marriage, the kind of life that they were leading. A lot of instances, a lot of debates and dialogues have been mentioned. So this Rishi Patni or Rishikaएं, these are women scholars, these are wives of public intellectuals, these are daughters of public intellectuals, these are also independent women who used to participate in public life. They used to do dialogues in the public sphere. Largely in the form of our oral tradition, still these are unnamed women who are lost in the history of Vedic traditions. These voices, I think that they are of philosophical importance, as they have the possibility to make us think about the possible reasons behind why there is a disparity when we try to talk about gender, when we try to talk about social taboos, when we try to talk about conventional and unconventional lifestyle in the contemporary Hindu society. For instance, I'll give you an example. In the 10th chapter, 84th section of Rig Veda, there's a proper chapter dedicated to the concept of veil or ghungat, or covering your face. Now, largely every time when we talk about Indian brides or Hindu brides, the oral tradition gives a very different understanding, that there has to be shame associated with them, there has to be a lot of conventionality associated with them. But in the Rig Veda, when I was reading with my sir, I realized that there are sections where the bride, when the bride and the groom, once they're getting married, after the marriage, when they're going to meet the elders, so the bride has been given blessings that she should be full of confidence, she should debate, she should show her dissent with everyone, the people that she's talking. So the idea of shame and conventionality, which oral traditions are, I would not use the term as forcing, but the way oral traditions or the way the contemporary society or Hindu society is talking about it, unfortunately or fortunately, theoretically, the picture is also different. It's in the similar Rig Veda that I ended up stumbling upon the names of these Rishikais, these women intellectuals. And they are close to 25, 27. Basically, the popular ones are the ones which I have read so far. So the first is called as Ghosha, the second is Godha, the third is Vishwavara, the fourth is Shraddha, and the fifth is Medha. So while encountering about their dialogues, their their suggestions, the kind of life, the kind of engagements they were having in the public life, that gave me a very different understanding of how an Indian woman, or how the idea of woman is perceived in general in the Vedic tradition. For instance, in Rig-Veda itself, there is a provision, because still this is a highly debatable issue in the Indian society. There are two kinds of marriages. One is an arranged marriage, where parents are seeking a particular kind of groom or bride for their respective kids, and the other is love marriage, which that's how it's been popularly defined in the Indian society, where in a very conventional and conventional manner, a person decides that, okay, this
You're
is the
at
person.
15 minutes if you wanted to wrap up and leave some time
Yeah,
for
I
questions.
would just take 2 minutes to wrap up.
Sure.
So, yeah. So, in Rig Veda, there is a particular aspect where there's this term which has been used, which is called as Patanvara, which stands for woman who. There's a category of women which has been used in the Rig Veda, and this is the term used for women who chose their partners on their own. And there is a whole lot of section. This comes in chapter 3, section 2, and subsection 46, where this particular kind of category was entertained. It was talked about. That they so of the impression which I got after reading Rig Veda, or after reading certain segments of Rig Veda, which is still going on because it's huge. And I thought that it gives you an impression that let 100 flowers blossom, let 1,000 different kinds of flowers bloom. And no one needs to be in a particular manner painted in one way of understanding things. So, as I said, that this is still an ongoing project, and I'm still reading the text because it's a huge, big text. But of whatever limited reading I have done, I thought that this could be maybe a good forum to share about it, to talk about it. I would be more than happy to take different kinds of questions, dissent, thoughts. So this is it from my side. Thank you.